Hey, what's up guys, I'm Ben. Welcome to the Swanky Cat Productions channel where I put one new snowmobile video out every week in the wintertime. So if you want to see more content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about my 2013 Arctic Cat F1100. I've owned this sled for a couple of years now, put quite a few thousand miles on it, done everything from 80 miles an hour for extended period of time on the beautiful trails up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, to at least attempting to get this thing to carve out on the lake in some deep powder. I've done engine oil changes, I've done gear case oil changes, I have switched some parts out in the skid. I think I have a pretty good understanding of what it is like to own this sled, and that's kind of the plan for today, is just to kind of go through all of that and give you kind of the pluses and minuses. So if you're unfamiliar, the F1100 is very similar yet not exactly the same as the later model ZR5000. Both sleds that use the Suzuki Parallel Twin, which is a 1056 4-stroke engine, which puts out about 123 horsepower and 75 foot-pounds of torque. And honestly, those numbers don't sound too bad until you take into consideration that all topped off with fuel and the skid packed full of snow and ice, this thing weighs 646 pounds. Which is obviously why 4-strokes get a bit of a bad rap and why a 2-stroke is always going to feel a bit lighter. However, I have to say, with all of the preloads adjusted for the front springs and the rear springs, this sled actually feels incredibly nice on the trails. It definitely feels a lot lighter to drive around than it does to try to lift up and move around, which is just something you're kind of going to run into with a 4-stroke. Depending on the type of trail riding or off-trail riding you're going to do, it might actually make more sense to have a heavier sled that wants to stick to the trail. And like I said, with this thing set up correctly, with the right carbides, the right skis, this thing actually corners quite nice, even though it does offer sort of an upright riding position, which is much more comfortable than my previous sled, which was a Polaris 600 Dragon. This thing is much easier on my back, and as you kind of get newer, the seats get higher, and that makes it even more comfortable. So as far as comfort goes, as far as what I've ridden to date, this thing definitely gets an A+. I don't know why I started rating things on the alphabetical scale. I did not plan on doing that, and I'm gonna try to stay away from that for the rest of the video. Now, as far as off-trail riding goes, obviously, like I mentioned, the weight of this thing is not really all that great. However, I have to say I actually have had a blast playing around in the powder with this thing. I don't know if it's the fact that I've got the studs on the track or just the fact that this has a 129-inch track versus my old 121. Maybe it's the track itself. I'm honestly not sure, but this thing can actually crawl through powder quite well. Now, of course, certainly not recommending that you buy this sled if you want to do deep off-trail powder riding. However, as much of a bad rap as people give 4-strokes, you still can play around and have a good time with this sled under the right conditions, with the right expectations. Now, over the years, I've gotten a lot of questions on gas mileage of this sled. Now, my old 600 Dragon, I think, got about 6, 8, maybe 10 miles to the gallon, depending on how I was riding it. This thing, riding it fairly hard, you get about 14 miles to the gallon. Maybe you could get a little better than that if you're a little easier on it, but after I saw that, I kind of just quit checking. Now, a lot of people will tell you that this sled falls into sort of the 600 2-stroke class, and I would say that's fair to say. However, in a straight drag race between this sled and my old Polaris, this thing definitely did not make it off the whole shot. It sort of started to pull away. It's definitely not a boring sled to ride. I definitely agree with the fact that the kind of new classification for this sled, the ZR5000, falls just slightly below the ZR6000, being the 600 2-stroke version. It's really more of kind of a slow cruising luxury model than anything. And the reason that I say luxury is the fact that it does showcase a heated seat, which honestly is incredibly nice for those super cold days. If you are somebody who gets off of the seat a lot or likes to ride kind of more up on the tank, you might not even notice that the seat is heated because it is kind of towards the back half, and you have to be seated on it for some period of time for it to actually heat up and warm you up. Now, as far as maintenance on this thing goes, I do have some videos that you guys can look into. They are a little bit old, so they're not great, but it'll at least kind of show you what it looks like to change the oil, to switch out the gear case oil. I do have a couple videos on some belt issues that I had with this sled. I did end up switching the secondary clutch out for a big fin secondary. And the big fin upgrade is essentially exactly how it sounds. The fins on the outside of the clutch are physically larger, which helps expel more of the heat created by the friction from the belt. Now, if you're a fairly leisurely rider and you still have that old clutch on here, it might not be an issue for you. I only ran into problems when I was running 80 miles an hour for extended periods of time up in the UP, or really doing a lot of on-off throttle riding throughout the kind of tighter trail system closer to home here. I did blow quite a few belts that way, after I switched this over, I did a lot of hard riding and hard testing and high speed testing and have ran into absolutely zero issues. Still have the same exact belt on there that I did to start with after I put this new clutch on. And if you're looking at the turbo version of this sled, definitely make sure that you switch out that clutch for a big fin. Otherwise, you can kiss your belt goodbye almost immediately. Now, if you're going to look at a used one of these, there are a couple things that you want to keep an eye out for. So the first sled like this that I went and test drove, the mounting point for the top A-arm here, where it actually is attached to the bulkhead, which I believe is a riveted part, was actually busted off. And that is something that I think is a little bit of a weak point, just as spread out as these A-arms are and as far out as they stick. I think they really just are kind of something that can be a casualty of maybe a sled on sled or a sled on tree incident. The other thing that I've actually ran into on my own sled here is that this sway bar linkage, the tab here actually busted right off of the A-arm, and I'm not sure when that happened or why, but it was easy enough for me to tack back on there. Not a huge deal, but definitely something you want to keep an eye out for if you're going to test drive or use one of these. And at one point I did have to tighten up the linkage between the main steering shaft and the two tie rods. I think something like this is definitely something you probably need to keep an eye on any sled. This is not the first sled that I've had to do this on, and in general it's always good to kind of just torque down your bolts every once in a while and just kind of keep an eye out for anything that doesn't feel right or doesn't look right. Now, if you guys want to see exactly how I did that, there is an adjustment and maintenance playlist that I'll put down in the description. It'll be in that video. It's the slop fixed video. Obviously, you've got a lot of wear parts in the skid that you're going to need to check and replace every couple years, depending on how much you ride. You're going to have to go through and refresh your shocks on every sled. That sort of stuff I don't think is really even worth mentioning. But the fluid changeouts on this sled are a little bit of a pain in the butt, still not impossible. Something you can do with maybe a few specialty tools. Replacing the parts in the skid is actually super easy. I can link a video down in the description if you want to see how it works. But you essentially just have to pull two bolts out of the back, get the rear end up high enough, and you can actually just drop the whole skid right out. It's super easy, super clean. As far as making the adjustments to the preload and all the settings on the skid, I would say it's definitely something you need to look at an owner's manual for. However, none of it's really all that difficult. They make everything pretty easy to switch. A lot of the stuff you can do out on the trail with very little problem and just a couple extra tools. As far as the longevity of this sled goes, I have to say I am very impressed with how this sled is doing at over 10,000 miles. There are always going to be replacement parts. It doesn't matter what brand you're looking at. That's just going to depend on how hard you ride and how much you ride. But as far as the motor goes and just how the sled kind of overall feels, how the plastics and everything have held up, maybe everything is not perfect, but honestly, with as many miles as this thing has on it, I think it's still in incredibly good shape, and honestly, I would trust the motor for a lot more than 10,000 miles. And that, of course, is kind of the benefit of a four-stroke. Maybe you're not screaming down the trails, but you're going to be able to ride those trails for a lot longer without having to ever worry about touching any of the internals and the engine. Now, as for the reason that I've decided to part ways with this sled, and yes, you heard me right, I will be selling this sled probably before the snow falls here. I have been on this sled for enough time that I think it is just time to move on. At my point in my snowmobiling career, I want to move to something a little bit quicker. If you are perfectly happy with a 600 class snowmobile, you will probably be more than happy with this thing, as long as you keep in mind that it's maybe not going to be quite as snappy off the line as your old 600 was. But as long as you're prepared for that and you understand it, I think this could definitely be a good machine for anybody. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this video was helpful and informative to you. If it was, make sure to give it a like and let me know down in the comments section. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down there. I will try and get back to you. Other than that, guys, take care, stay safe, stay swanky, get out, enjoy this beautiful world any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime.